I went back to Ashford Lake to forget, but the water remembered. It had been years, over 15 actually, but as I drove down the winding roads leading into the town, I felt the familiar pressure in my chest. The kind you can't explain, but it's there, tight and unsettling. It was a feeling I hadn't thought about in years. A feeling I had buried. I didn't want to return. I didn't even plan to. But something tugged at me when I saw the sign for Ashford Lake, like a whisper from somewhere deep inside me, urging me to pull off the highway. It was a strange thing, almost as if I had no control over my body anymore. So I turned in. The cabin was the same. A little rundown now, but still the same. My dad used to bring us here every summer. That was before he drowned. Before the lake stole my brother from me. Daniel had been my best friend. We did everything together. But it was 1997, and one summer afternoon, he didn't come back from the water. I remember the panic, the shouting, the searching. But I don't remember much else after that. Just the nightmarish sound of my mom crying and the whispers from people who told me to be strong, but their voices didn't reach me. I hadn't come back to Ashford since the funeral. Until now. The place felt quieter than I remembered. Maybe it was just the time of year, autumn, with the trees already bare, the air crisp, but there was something about the silence that felt unnatural. The lake stretched out in front of me, was still and dark, the water so smooth it looked like a giant mirror. I stood there for a while just watching it. It had this pull to it, something deep and unshakable, almost as if it were breathing with me. I parked my car by the cabin and stepped out, stretching my legs. The gravel crunched under my boots as I made my way toward the old porch. The cabin was cold inside, and I shivered when I stepped through the door, but the smell hit me first. That damp, earthy smell of wood and mildew. It was familiar, almost comforting. I flicked on the lights, but only a couple of bulbs worked. The place hadn't been lived in for years. The old furniture was still there, dusty but intact. I set my bag on the couch and sat by the window, staring at the lake again. There was something about it, the way the fog rolled off the water, thick and suffocating. I must have sat there for hours, watching it shift. The light from the setting sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the water surface. The air was so still, it felt like the world had stopped moving. The only sound was the faint rustling of the trees in the breeze and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. And then something happened. It was a noise, a faint, almost imperceptible sound like something heavy hitting the water. I turned toward the lake. The surface was still, undisturbed. I told myself it was nothing. A branch, a log. It had to be. But then I heard it again, this time closer. A soft splash, followed by another, like something was swimming near the shore. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out. The sun was setting now, the light dimming, the shadows growing long. The lake, still as it was, now seemed different. The fish were moving strangely. They didn't dart like normal fish. They floated just beneath the surface, almost like they were waiting. I shook my head. I was just tired. It had been a long drive. I needed rest. But something about the water, about the way the fish hovered there, their shapes barely visible beneath the surface. Something about it unsettled me in a way I couldn't put into words. I tried to push it out of my mind, tried to distract myself by unpacking, cleaning up. But the moment I turned my back on the lake, I felt it. Something was watching me. The rest of the evening was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I went to bed late, but sleep didn't come easily. My dreams were filled with fragments, flashes of water, Daniel's face, and the sound of scream I couldn't place. When I woke, the sun had already risen. I could hear birds outside, but the water still quiet. The same silence as before. But something had changed. The fish, they were gone. The surface of the lake was smooth again, almost too smooth. I told myself it was nothing. Nothing but my mind playing tricks on me. I was here to relax, to find some peace. I tried to ignore it, but when I saw the reflection in the window that morning, I swear I saw someone standing at the edge of the lake. I didn't go out that day. The morning passed slowly, the hours dragging as I forced myself to do mundane things. Clean the kitchen, make coffee, sit on the couch and stare at the lake. But my eyes kept drifting back to the water. It was as if something invisible was pulling my gaze there. The lake had become a fixation, a dark center I couldn't ignore. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that the reflection I'd seen the day before was just a trick of the light. But I knew it wasn't. Something was there. The weird thing was that it wasn't the presence I was worried about. It was the memory. The way it felt so familiar, like I'd seen that figure before, long ago. It wasn't a person though, not exactly. More like a shadow, a shape that belonged in the landscape. I couldn't shake it. By midday, the tension in my chest had grown. I tried to distract myself by going through old boxes in the attic. Mostly junk, forgotten toys, broken keepsakes, and things that never quite made sense. But then I found something I shouldn't have. It was a notebook hidden under a pile of dusty old books. I didn't recognize it at first, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was Daniel's handwriting, a journal he'd kept in the summer of '97, the summer before he disappeared. I hesitated, my fingers trembling. What was it doing here? Why hadn't I remembered it? Why hadn't anyone else said anything about it? I sat down, feeling the weight of the air around me thicken, and began reading. The first few entries were typical for a 10-year-old, childish ramblings, stories about the things we did, the games we played. But then the tone changed. The handwriting became more erratic, the words more strained. I keep seeing things at the lake. Fish with big eyes. They watch me when I swim. I'm scared to go back in. I blinked, a cold shiver crawling up my spine. That wasn't normal. I remember that summer. Daniel was obsessed with fishing. He loved the lake. But I also remembered how he started acting differently, more withdrawn, more distant. I never knew why. I just assumed it was part of growing up, the weird shifts we all go through when we're kids. But the fish, big eyes? I turned the page. There were more notes, darker ones. They told me things. The fish. They know things. I can't understand it. They say I should join them. I think they want me to become like them. My heart pounded. I snapped the book shut. What was this? Why hadn't anyone told me about this journal? Why had I never read it? My mind raced as the memories started flooding back, fragmenting and twisting. I set the notebook down, stood up, and walked back toward the window. The lake was still there, calm and inviting, the reflection of the sky mirroring perfectly in its surface. But now it felt wrong. The stillness felt unnatural, oppressive. And there they were again, the fish, floating just beneath the surface. Watching, I felt a strange compulsion, a pull to go closer, to dive into the water and feel them, their eyes on me, their cold touch. The thought was absurd, but it lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I pushed the feeling aside, deciding to take a walk to clear my head. I needed fresh air, away from the cabin, away from the lake. But the moment I stepped outside, I felt it, that feeling that I was being watched. Not just by the fish this time, but something else. Something out there in the trees. I glanced around, but there was nothing. Nothing except the trees, the lake, and the fading light of the day. But something tugged at my mind, something I couldn't quite place. It was like the air itself was thick with presence. I kept walking past the old docks, down the familiar path that led to the water's edge. The trees had grown taller since the last time I'd been here, their twisted limbs reaching out like fingers, blocking out the fading light. I stopped at the water's edge, peering into the murky depths, feeling an inexplicable connection. Something was pulling me in, almost as if the lake itself were calling to me, urging me to dive into its depths. I shook my head, trying to clear the thought. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. I turned to walk back, but then I heard it. A voice. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Come closer. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I looked around, but no one was there. It's safe now. Come, join us. It was the voice of a child, a familiar voice, Daniel's voice. I turned back toward the water, my pulse racing. The fish were closer now. They swam in a tight circle just beneath the surface, their shapes darker, more defined. It almost seemed like they were waiting. I couldn't explain why, but the fear I felt was tinged with something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or a deep yearning I couldn't suppress. I felt like I knew what they wanted from me, what they'd wanted from Daniel. It was the same thing I had been hearing in my dreams, the voice calling, begging for someone to join. I took a step closer to the water. Another step, The voice was louder now, echoing in my mind, guiding me toward the edge. I didn't even realize I had started to move until my feet hit the water. It was freezing, a shock that made my body tense, but I didn't care. The fish were close now, their eyes glinting, watching me with an intensity one couldn't escape. And then just as suddenly, the voice stopped. Silence. Everything was still again. The fish stopped moving, the air felt cold, and I felt empty, as if something had been taken from me. I blinked rapidly, trying to shake off the dizziness. What had I just done? I turned and ran back to the cabin, heart pounding, but I could still feel their eyes on me. I slammed the door behind me, locking it. I sat in the dark, the room feeling colder than ever. Something had changed, but the most terrifying part? I couldn't remember when it had started, and now I was afraid to even think about it. I spent the next few days in a fog, unable to focus on anything other than the lake. My thoughts kept spiraling back to that moment when I'd stood on the edge, feeling the cold water seep into my bones. I couldn't explain what had happened or why I had felt so compelled to step into that lake. But then, the dreams began. They started the first night, just a whisper of shadows at the edge of my consciousness. At first, it was nothing, just fragments of images. A fish's gleaming eye, dark and endless. A ripple on the water, spreading in widening circles. But as the nights went on, the images became clearer, more vivid. I saw Daniel, his face distorted, warped as if submerged in water. He was reaching for me, his eyes wide with panic. The sound of water splashing in my ears. The murmur of voices, too quiet to understand, but impossible to ignore. I woke up every time, gasping for breath, drenched in sweat. I would lie there in the dark, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it all. I tried to push it out of my mind. I didn't want to go back to the lake. I couldn't go back. But then the compulsion came again. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a deep, gnawing pull, like something inside me was missing, like something had been left behind, buried in the depths of that water. The next evening, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way to the lake. I couldn't stop myself. It was as if the lake had become a part of me, an obsession I couldn't escape. The moment I stepped onto the familiar path leading to the water's edge, the cold air hit me, biting through my hoodie. The trees around me seemed taller, darker, their shadows stretching long and sinister across the ground. The lake was still, too still. I walked closer, feeling the weight of the silence pressing in on me. The usual sounds, the gentle lapping of water, the rustling of leaves, were gone. It was as though the world itself had held its breath. And then I heard it, a low, almost imperceptible hum, vibrating beneath the surface. A sound like a distant song, haunting and familiar, calling to me. I took a step closer. The flashlight flickered in my hand, casting strange, shifting shadows across the water. My breath caught in my throat as I saw the first movement. A single fish, its pale belly gleaming in the beam of light. Its eyes, those wide, empty eyes, locked onto mine, and for a moment, I swore I could hear it whispering, "Come closer." The words were distorted, echoing in my mind, but they were clear. I couldn't move. I felt rooted to the spot, trapped in the gaze of the fish. I couldn't explain it, but I knew that it wasn't just a fish. It was something more, something ancient, something that had been watching me long before I realized it. And then, just as I was about to reach out, the surface of the water shifted. The ripples spread outward, and suddenly, the water was teeming with movement. Fish, hundreds of them, swirling in the depths, their eyes fixed on me. They circled, their bodies brushing the surface, sending waves of cold water over my feet. I staggered back, my heart hammering in my chest. But then I saw it. A figure emerged from the water, rising slowly, its body submerged up to the waist. It was a boy, no, a child, the same size and build as Daniel. His hair clung to his face, dripping with water. His eyes were wide and empty, staring at me, unblinking. It was him, but it wasn't. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his eyes locked onto mine, as if waiting for something. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I was rooted in place, paralyzed by the sight of him. I could feel my chest tightening, my breath shallow. My body was telling me to run, to get away, but I couldn't move. The boy in the water was still watching me, as if he were waiting for something I didn't understand. And then I heard it again, the voice. "You're next." The words echoed, reverberating through my skull, chilling me to my core. The boy's lips didn't move. The sound wasn't coming from him. It was coming from everywhere. From the water, from the fish, from the very air around me. I stumbled backward, my feet slipping on a wet ground, but before I could turn to run, something grabbed my ankle. I looked down in horror, but there was nothing there. Nothing, except the water. The fish swarmed beneath my feet, their sharp bodies grazing my skin, tugging at my leg. I yanked away, but the pull was too strong. I looked up in panic, but the boy was gone. The lake was still again, calm and undisturbed, like nothing had happened. But I knew what I had seen. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding so loud I thought the whole world could hear it. I turned and ran without looking back until I reached the cabin. I slammed the door behind me, locked it, and dropped to the floor, gasping for air. I couldn't escape it. It was everywhere now. The lake, the fish, the boy. They were all inside my head, pulling at me, dragging me down into the depths of something I couldn't understand. I had to know what it all meant. I had to know the truth, but I was afraid of what I might find. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The boy in the water staring at me with those empty eyes. I kept hearing the voice, whispering in the back of my mind, growing louder with each passing hour. "You're next." I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I could still hear the faint hum from the lake, that unnatural vibration in the air that seemed to follow me everywhere. The smell of wet earth, the cold bite of the water, it was all too vivid, too real. I had to understand. There had to be an answer, something to explain what was happening to me. The next morning, I drove to the local library, desperate to find anything that could shed light on the strange events surrounding the lake. The town had always been quiet, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the world, its secrets buried beneath layers of time. But something told me there was more to this place than I had ever realized. I spent hours digging through old records, town archives, anything that might hold a clue. It wasn't until I found the town's original founding documents that I came across something strange. The town had been established in the early 1800s, but it was the lake that caught my attention. There were references to the lost, a local legend about people who had disappeared around the lake. Men, women, children, vanishing without a trace. The records were sparse, almost as if someone had deliberately erased them from history. But one name stood out among all the others: Daniel. Daniel. I froze, my fingers hovering over the page as a wave of nausea hit me. This couldn't be a coincidence. The name was too close, too specific. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it. Could it really be the same Daniel? The one who had vanished when we were kids? I scrolled through more pages, but the details were too vague, the connections too distant. I couldn't find any answers. Not in the old records, not in the town's history. But I did find something else. A letter dated back to the 1920s. It was addressed to someone named M. Sinclair, a name I didn't recognize. The letter spoke of an experiment conducted by a group of scientists in the late 1800s. They had been studying the fish in the lake, trying to unlock their secrets. The fish, they believed, were not ordinary creatures. They had developed unusual properties, something akin to memory. The letter mentioned human memory, specifically that the fish seemed to retain fragments of memories, of people who had died near the lake, of those who had vanished without a trace. The letter was filled with technical jargon, but the underlying message was clear. The fish were not just passive creatures. They were connected to the souls of the lost, storing their memories, their pain, their unfinished business. My heart raced as the pieces started to fall into place. The fish, they had Daniel's memories, and now they had mine. I left the library in a daze, barely registering the world around me. I felt like I was on the edge of something, teetering between reality and madness. But I had to go back to the lake. I had to confront it. I had to understand why the fish were calling to me. When I arrived at the lake, the sky was overcast, heavy clouds hanging low like a shroud. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the usual stillness of the water felt oppressive, like it was holding its breath. I walked to the edge, my feet dragging through the wet earth, my mind spinning with the things I had learned. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe some sort of revelation, or maybe just an end to the nightmare. But what I saw next sent me into a spiral. The boy, Daniel, emerged from the water once again. This time, he wasn't just standing there. He was moving toward me, his arms outstretched, his eyes locked onto mine. The water sloshed around him, but he didn't seem to care. He was just there. Come closer. The words came again, this time clearer, sharper. It was his voice, and yet it wasn't. It was the same voice from the lake, the same voice that had haunted me in my dreams. I couldn't move. My body refused to respond. My chest tightened, every breath a struggle, as if the air had thickened around me, making it impossible to breathe. I tried to look away. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then something inside me shifted. It was a flicker, just a brief moment, but in that instant I remembered. The night Daniel had disappeared. The lake, the fish, the strange feeling of being watched. It all clicked into place. I was the one who had taken him. The guilt flooded me like a tidal wave. We had been playing near the water, just like always. But that night, something had changed. I remembered the strange pull, the way the water had called to me. And I remembered the feeling of pushing Daniel into it. He hadn't wanted to go. He had begged me to stop, but I hadn't listened. I had dragged him into the depths. And now, the lake had returned the favor. It had come for me. The boy, Daniel, was standing right in front of me now, his hand outstretched, his eyes wide with accusation. "You're next." His voice was no longer distant. It was right next to me, in my ear, in my mind, tearing through my thoughts. I stumbled backward, my mind spinning, my heart pounding, but it was too late. The fish were closing in. The lake was pulling me in, holding me there, as if the water had already decided. The cold of the water seeped through my shoes, through my skin, like the lake was alive, feeding on my fear. My pulse hammered in my ears as I took another stumbling step back, but my legs weren't working right. It was as if the earth itself was pulling me toward the water, forcing me to face the thing I had tried to bury all these years. Daniel's ghost, or whatever he had become, didn't move. He simply stood there, his pale face twisted with something I couldn't quite place. But I could feel it. He was angry, but there was something else, something colder, more unforgiving. It wasn't just the boy I used to know. This was the lake taking shape in a human form, a manifestation of everything that had been lost in its depths. "What?" I gasped, my voice barely a whisper, as the water lapped at my ankles. The coldness gnawed at me, pulling me further into the embrace of the lake. "Why are you doing this?" His eyes were unblinking, dark pools that swallowed any light. "You know why," he said, his voice splitting between the young, familiar timbre of the child I had known and the other, deeper one that echoed from the murk of the lake itself. It was as if the lake had adopted his voice, twisted it, layered it with every whispered secret and forgotten memory of the drowned. I couldn't breathe. My mind spun with guilt, with fear, with the knowledge that the past had never really left me. It had been swimming beneath the surface, waiting for its moment to rise, to claim me. I tried to speak, but the words failed me. My throat was tight, my stomach a knot of nausea and dread. "I never meant to." "You didn't mean to?" His voice mocked me, the boy's face now contorting in that hideous way. His mouth stretched wider, the smile too big, too wide for any human being to bear. "You never meant to, but you did." And I had to remember. A flash of a night he had disappeared tore through my mind. The struggle, his terrified face as I pushed him under the water. I could still hear his screams, though they were muffled by the waves, swallowed by the depths. It had been an accident, but the lake didn't care about accidents. The lake didn't forget. "It wasn't your fault," I whispered, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were a lie. It had been mine. I had taken him, and now I would pay the price. The water was rising faster now, creeping on my legs, thick and oily with memories I didn't want to confront. My hands shook as I tried to steady myself, but my legs were weak, sinking into the mud. I could hear something under the surface, a whisper, a scraping sound that made my stomach turn. The fish. The lake was full of them, and they had memories of the ones who had fallen, memories of their pain, their anger. Their stories were tangled in the murky water, hidden from view, but they were always there, pulling at the edges of my mind. The fish were watching. They had always been watching. I turned, desperate, my eyes scanning the shore. I needed to get out, but the ground beneath me felt soft, unstable, as if it could give way at any moment, dragging me down with it. "You can't leave." Daniel's voice came again, louder this time, a twisted melody woven with the rustling of the water. "You're already part of it. You've always been." A scream rose in my throat, but it was swallowed by the gurgling noise coming from the lake. I stumbled again, but my body was frozen, held in place by something stronger than fear, by the lake itself. It was as if it had decided that my sins would never leave me. I would never leave it. I turned back to face Daniel's apparition, but now there were more. Figures, shapes rising from the water, emerging like ghosts from the deep, their faces indistinct but familiar. People I'd never seen, yet somehow I knew them. Faces from the past, from the records, from the stories I had uncovered. The victims, the ones who had drowned before me, and they all had the same look in their eyes. The same look Daniel had. They were waiting. "You'll never leave this place," Daniel whispered, his form starting to dissolve into the water. "Not as long as the memories remain." I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a broken sob. The lake was closing in, swallowing the world around me. The water rose higher, now up to my waist, then to my chest. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. I was trapped by the lake, by the memories, by the choices I had made long ago. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the fish were still watching. They would never forget, and neither would I.